Welcome everyone. In this video, we are going to be looking at chemical bonding, one of the most important topic in your exam. So, before I begin, don't forget to subscribe, comment, and share to your friends if the video is helpful so that it can also help your friends. So to begin, what is chemical bonding? So whenever we are talking about chemical bonding, we are saying that this is a chemical combination of two or more atoms. So when we say chemical bonding or when we say bonding, this is the combination of two or more atoms. Yeah. So when we say chemical bonding, this is the chemical combination of two or more atoms. So when we're talking about atoms, atoms can either be sodium, magnesium, chlorine, fluorine, hydrogen. So these are atoms. So when we say atoms, we are saying that these atoms, they chemically combine to form either a compound or a molecule. So when these atoms, they combine through chemical bonding, they either form a molecule or a compound. So an example of a compound can be sodium chloride, which is a combination of sodium and chlorine. Then another example of a molecule, it can either be hydrogen. So hydrogen, this is a molecule which is a combination of two or more atoms of hydrogen. So now that you have understood what chemical bonding is and what forms when chemical bonding occurs, now we are going to know the reason why do atoms combine to form compounds. Why can't they just be alone? So these atoms, the reason they form bonds is, so the reason for chemical bonding is that atoms form stable structures or stable compounds. So the reason for chemical bonding is that atoms, they form what? Stable compounds. So atoms by themselves, they are not stable, but once they form a chemical bond, they become stable and attain a structure of gases which we call noble gases. So another reason is that to attain the structure of noble gases. So what are these noble gases? So these noble gases, these are gases which have their electrons or their shells filled with electrons. An example we can give is helium, argon, and neon. So these are some of the examples of noble gases. Then when we write their electronic configuration, which is the representation of electrons. So the electronic configuration just represents the what? the number of electrons. So a simple trick which you can use when you are identifying the number to use on the periodic table, just pick the smaller number. We know that we have two numbers. We have the mass number and the proton number. So the one which we use is the proton number to represent what? The number of electrons. So for example, helium, it has 2 electrons, which means its entire shell is filled with electrons. Then argon has 2 in its first shell, then 8 in its second shell, giving its proton number 10. We know that helium proton number is 2. Then when we talk about neon, when we talk about argon, it has 2,8,8, sorry. Then when we talk about neon, it has 2,8, meaning neon has a proton number of 10, whilst argon has a proton number of 18, and helium has a number of proton which is 2. So you are wondering, how am I calculating the number of protons? So you just add the numbers. Then if you are given the periodic table to identify, just go for the smaller number. So we have understood why atoms form bond from saying that in order to form stable compound, also in order to attain the structure of noble gases, which can be helium, argon, or neon. Now that you have understood why atoms they form chemical bond, and also have understood the definition of atoms, we are going to look at the first type of chemical bonding. So the first type of chemical bonding which you need to understand is ionic bonding. But remember, we have 3 types of bonding. So we have 3 types of bonding. So types of bonding. So we have basically 1, ionic bonding. 2, we have covalent bonding. Then 3, we have metallic bonding. So these are the 3 types of chemical bonding which you need to know and understand. So in this video, I'll basically look at the first type of chemical bonding, which is ionic bonding. So we are going to understand the meaning of ionic bonding. So what does ionic bonding mean? So we are going to be looking at our first topic, which is ionic bonding. So if you have missed any point, be sure to rewind the video. This is a recorded video. You can go back to the question and go through again. So what does ionic bonding mean? So when we're talking about ionic bonding, this is the type, or this is the bond which involves the transfer of electrons from metals to non-metals. So when we're talking about ionic bonding, this is a type of bonding which occur between metals and non-metals. So for those of you that don't know metals, metals are from group 1 to group 4. Then from group 6, group 5, 6, 7, and 8, those are non-metals. So when we have, for example, sodium and chlorine, they combine to form sodium chloride. That is an ionic bond because sodium is a metal and chlorine is a non-metal. So now we know what ionic bonding is. Now we have to know, how does ionic bonding occur? So ionic bonding occur when a metal loses its electron to a non-metal. So basically here an electron is transferred from a metal to a non-metal in what? Ionic bonding. Yeah. Then you have to understand that only electrons, so only electrons in the outermost shell take part. So only the electrons in the last shell take part in chemical bonding. We are going to look at two examples where you will see how ionic bonding occur, in case they bring a question where you have to draw, because they like bringing question. Draw a close and dot diagram to represent the bond which can be formed between sodium and chlorine. So let's move on to examples. So examples which we'll look at today, I have 3. So the first one we are going to look at when sodium and chlorine combine. So we know that when sodium and chlorine combine, they form what is known as sodium chloride. So the first thing you need to do, if they ask you to draw a close and dot diagram, they are saying show us what or how the reaction takes place. So the first thing you need to look for is the proton number. So remember, sodium has a proton number of 11. So you say, since it has a proton number of 11, the first shell always has 2 electrons. Then the second shell has 8 electrons. And the third has 8, just like that. So you say, since sodium has 11, you say the first shell will have 2. So 11 minus 2, we have what? 9. Then the second shell has 8. Then 9 minus 8, we have 1. So meaning in the last shell, sodium has only 1 electron. So this 1 electron is the electron which will take part in what? Chemical bonding or ionic bonding. Then after identifying the proton number, we move on to chlorine. You also identify the proton number. So chlorine is in group 7 and it has the proton number of 17. So you are going to say chlorine, since it has 17, the first shell has 2, the second 8. So 8 plus 2 you have what? 10. Then 17 minus 10, we have 7. So meaning chlorine in its outermost shell has 7 electrons. So these 7 electrons are the ones which will take part in ionic bonding. So after you have identified the proton number, you move on now to give them what? Which one will be your cross, which one will be your dot. So in our case, we'll give sodium as our cross, then we'll give chlorine a dot. So now we are going to represent how they will look. So you say the first shell will always have what? 2 electrons. So since this is a cross, you put at the center, you say sodium. Then you are using close. So you say 1, 2. Then you move on to the second shell. Again, you say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then you end there. Why are we ending there? Because we said metals lose electrons. So since sodium only has 1 electron and it has lost that electron, we are going to say sodium has become positively charged because it has lost 1 electron. So when it has lost 1 electron, we don't write 1 here, positive 1. No, we just put a positive sign. Then second, you go to what? Chlorine. So again, you do the same thing. The first shell, you say chlorine. So here we are using dot. So you say 1, 2. Then you move on to the second shell. So you are going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then since non-metals, they gain electrons, so meaning they won't lose the last shell, they will maintain it. So you say the last shell is supposed to have what? 8, because it has received 1 from a non-metal. Yeah. So you say 1, 2, 3. Then here you put a close to show that this electron came from sodium. Then here 6, 7, 8. Then you even do like that. Then you even include the sign. So whatever is received should be given what? A negative sign. So now you can try to find the what? The cross and the dot diagram for magnesium oxide. So this is your task now for you to try. So you need to find the cross for magnesium oxide, which is MgO. So I'm going to give you the proton number. So proton number for magnesium is, the proton number for magnesium is 12, and the proton number for oxygen is 8. So you are going to write, and the electron configuration for those that don't know, it is 2, 8, 2. Then for oxygen is 2, 6. Yeah. So I need you to draw now the close and dotted diagram of a compound which will be formed when magnesium oxide react with oxygen. So this is where part 1 of the video ends. In part 2, we are going to, before I end, there are some principles which you need to understand, or there are some properties for ionic bonding. So what are the properties for ionic bonding? So the first thing you need to know is when this bond is formed between magnesium oxide, sodium chlorine, they have a high melting and boiling point. That's the first properties. So this is due because positive and negative charges, they have strong force of attraction between them, so they are difficult to break. Then the second thing is in aqueous state, in aqueous, they conduct electricity. So why do they conduct electricity in aqueous state? Because ions move freely. Yeah, so this is where our part 1 video is going to end on chemical bonding. So be sure to check out my part 2 video on covalent bonding and the last video on metallic bonding in preparation for your exam. So don't forget to subscribe and comment if you have any questions on the video.